there, it is Jo from Minerva, and today I'm here for another masterclass series where we add to our knowledge of different base cloths. Today I'm looking at brocade. Sometimes it falls into the category of jacquard as well. Our Fabric Masterclass series runs in conjunction with our Minerva fabric guide. It's a fantastic resource where you will gain lots and lots of knowledge about fabric. It's not a project book. It's the brainchild of Minerva. It's a real useful way to help you to shop online for fabrics. So when you see the little swatch on screen, you don't necessarily know what it feels like, what you can use it for. You sometimes just do eye candy shopping. But with the Minerva fabric guide, you can gain lots and lots of knowledge in the first part of the book. And then in the last chapter, there are 70 different base cloths of our most popular fabrics. So it's not all the fabrics that we sell. It gives you information in alphabetical order, and it also gives you, when you buy the book, you get a pack of 70 swatches and you can put them into the book so that you can feel the hand of the fabric. Let's take a look at the brocade section. Here you'll see brocade partnered up with jacquard because they're very similar fabrics. They have a textured surface and they are a woven fabric. You can compare the fabric characteristics that are on the sticker on the back with other fabrics that are similar. So you could look for other woven fabrics, you could feel them, you could see if they've got a sheen. This piece happens to be more of a jacquard because if we put a brocade piece in there, it would fray quite a lot, and that's what we're going to talk about today. It's rated as a difficult fabric because of the fraying and the handling of the fabric, and also I think because it is a fabric that takes more consideration about which project you choose it for. You can get very different brocades and jacquards, so it's very difficult to find a common thread amongst all the different ones that we sell. Some are metallic, some are textured, some are made of one particular fibre, some in another. So here, this section will give you some ideas of how some are made. There's lots of characteristics and features of the fabric that you can find out in the guide. There's quite a big section here on sewing tips, but today I'm hoping to really expand on that to help you choose the right pattern if you're thinking of exploring the world of brocade and jacquard. We'll take a look at the rest of the book towards the end of the video, but let's stay specific to that fabric type for now. Brocade is a woven fabric, often with a metallic thread or a particular texture. It will have a very prominent right side and wrong side. You can use either, but let's take a look at the fabric close-up. I've got two to compare so that you can see the differences in them. It's harder for you because obviously I can feel the difference, but I'm going to try and show you close-up the reverse and the right side of the fabric. Let's have a look at these two fabrics close-up. Every brocade is different. They're so varied. You get the jacquard ones, which are a much flatter weave. You can get these textured ones. Sometimes the reverse is more desirable than the right side, so they can be used with whichever side that you want. It depends. You'll need to look at the finish of them. So this one you could reverse if you wanted a more muted finish. This one doesn't feel very rough, so you could get away with not lining this one. The metallic threads are on this side, so that side feels quite satiny and smooth. But of course, all of these jacquards and brocades have that fraying characteristic, which is what makes them a little bit of an intermediate sew. The one that I'm using today is thick and spongy. It's sort of bouncy. If you put pleats in it, they would be soft pleats. You wouldn't get like sharp, crisp edges on there, but you would get lots and lots of fullness. The second one that I wanted to show you is much finer. It's much thinner. And you can see on the back, you get the inverse of the pattern on the front. It does that fraying in the same way. But there's something about this one compared to the other one that is different, which is you really wouldn't want to have that against your skin. Listen, it's rough. I can sort of feel little nicks catching on it. Your jewellery would catch on that if you wore any jewellery. And it's a much finer fabric all round. So this one you would definitely need to line. Other one, I would say you could choose between whether you did or you didn't. But this one, for comfort, you would need to line it. It's much finer. It's lighter. But it still has that structured, bouncy texture. That makes soft pleats or voluminous gathers. I would highly recommend that if you're thinking about using Brocade or Jacquard, then you think about getting a sample. So Minerva run a sample service, and you can get a strip of the fabric. I just think with the variety in this fabric subtype, it's very difficult just to go from the little square on the screen. Obviously you can use all the tips and photographs and information from our Minerva makers, that will certainly help you. But if you're looking for something really specific, especially for a special occasion wear, then I really recommend you get a sample. The other thing that makes it an intermediate fabric is that you're going to have to start making choices and decisions about some of the closures you use, how you press the fabric, what seams you choose, how you construct your item, and all of those things and decisions are best made if you have some experience before. So it's definitely an intermediate fabric. The reason this fabric becomes an intermediate sewing fabric, or in that higher difficulty bracket, is because of that element of choice. It's so hard when until you get the fabric and you hold it to really know how it behaves. It's one of those fabrics that has a real juxtaposition because it's light but it's firm, and you'll find some information about that in the fabric guide. So weight versus the hand of the fabric is sometimes tricky to gauge with Brocade. So it might say it's light because this jacket is so light I can hardly feel like I'm wearing it, but it's really it holds its shape. So the weight of the fabric isn't about the hand of the fabric and what it feels like. What would you be making with Brocade? Well, I've made this jacket today. You'll see the process of me going through that. You can make skirts, you can make full suits, you can make evening wear, you can make bodice tops. It's particularly nice for vintage style patterns. So today my jacket is from a vintage pattern. I don't normally do that. I normally choose a pattern that's available on Minerva, but you can find any sort of little short crop jacket. All of those things will work with a Brocade or Jacquard. I'm going against nearly everything that I say about what you do with your fabric as soon as it arrives. I normally pre-wash my fabric, but with Brocade I'm not pre-washing it. It's mostly made in polyester fibres, so there's not going to be any shrinkage, and I don't want to damage any of that texture. You would probably be making something in Brocade that was special occasion that you didn't wear very often, so you'd be spot cleaning it, or just making sure that it was just on a hand wash or a cool washing bowl wash. You wouldn't necessarily be putting it in the washing machine. So that's your first thing to consider when you're choosing a pattern. How often am I going to be wearing this thing, and will the Brocade that I've chosen stand up to lots and lots of washing? It certainly won't stand up to that in the washing machine. Let's take a look at storing our fabric, cutting it, preparing it and handling it, because that's a really big part of this fabric type. All the way through the video today I'm using the word Brocade, but in lots of instances I'm also talking about Jacquard fabrics because they behave in exactly the same way. I've been storing my Brocade rolled on a tube because I don't want to get any permanent creases in it, because I can't put a hot iron on it to press them out. So if you can find a place to keep your Brocade rolled, then you'll avoid getting any permanent creases in the fabric. Because of the right side texture of Brocade, this is quite a vibrant print as well. I'm not going to see any markings on here very well, so I'm going to fold my fabric with the selvages together with the wrong side up, so that all my markings will be on the wrong side of the fabric. But you can of course use tailor's tacks so that you get your markings on both sides. If you're making something special occasion, then it's worth using tailor's tacks, because then you know you can do accurate collars, button bands and all of those kinds of features. Okay, I've got my fold and I'm going to cut out my jacket. You can cut your pattern pieces out with scissors, but you want to avoid lifting and creating this frayed edge. So much so that I've actually put my tailor's tacks on now, because I've put them through the paper and into their position, because I don't want to take the paper off, overlock the edges and then try and match back up the dart. So I've put the dart points in now. I am cutting this jacket slightly bigger on the side seam, but to avoid shifting and moving it around, I'm using my rotary cutter, because I can be doing the moving around rather than the fabric. You need to be really delicate with your fabric. If your rotary cutter leaves a little nick, don't pull it, you'll start a shed. Just gently move around. You might even need to use a combination of your rotary cutter and your scissors, so if you get any little threads that don't cut through, you can just cut those off. I'm going to leave that there, I'm not going to move it anywhere, and I'm going to cut out the rest of my pieces. If you've got a brocade with a metallic thread, then you might find that just using pattern weights is better than pins, because pins can catch some of the metallic threads and hook them out of place. So pattern weights and a sharp rotary cutter is also a good way forward. Normally, if I was marking the front notch and the back notches on my sleeve, I would just pop a little snip into the seam allowance, but I'm not going to do that with brocade because I really don't want it to fray. So I've marked it with some chalk. Now I know that chalk's not going to stay there forever, so I'm just going to put a couple of pins in as well. You can use tailor's tacks or any way that doesn't mean that you're snipping into the edge of the fabric and starting off a shedding path for the fabric to unravel. Normally when I'm cutting out, I will leave the pattern pieces on, so you can leave them on if you're going to cut out in one session and maybe overlock and finish in another. But because I'm trying to absolutely minimize the amount of movement, I'm going to take these pieces over to my overlocker and just overlock around the edge of everything to stop all fraying. I'm not going to put the pattern pieces away. I'm going to keep those out because I may need to put the pattern pieces back on once it's overlocked and then put on any markings. I did try there with the darts, but I think they might have moved a little bit. So I'm going to do the overlocking first. That keeps me in a safe zone. Then I can come back and put on any other pattern markings. Normally I would show you how to sew the fabric in the seam, but today I've got to switch it around because I'm going to do the finishing first, because it's so vital with the weave and the fraying of the fabric. So first of all, we're going to look at how to finish the fabric, and then we'll look at how to sew the seam. I'm finishing the edges, but I've taken the cutting blade off my overlocker, so I have no fraying on this front edge of the jacket at the moment. So I'm going to just make sure that that overlock edge takes everything in. I don't want to cut it off again, or I'm making new place for it to unravel. So I'm just going to take the cutting blade off. I've got my overlocking tested on a test piece because I don't want it to shed the sides. It's slightly more tricky on curves. You need to definitely work really carefully around there because you don't want the foot to be dragging the threads on the edge of the curve. If you don't have an overlocker, then Brocade isn't totally out of your reach. You can try an overcast stitch. So on my machine, it's stitch number 9. You might need to get your manual out and have a look for which one that is. It puts a straight seam and a zigzag, so you get double the protection of your seam. It can still look a little bit messy, but if you're lining your item, then this will be on the inside. When I pull the threads, they are locking on that overcast edge. So here, that isn't going to pull back any further, but you will get some shedding even once you've done it, and then you will need to tidy that up because you don't want any of this all getting caught around your foot. So if you don't have a serger, you can use an overcast stitch. You can also use a zigzag, but test first. Each brocade is different. Some shed faster than others. You can use a pair of pinking shears when you cut out your item, but it only really temporarily stops it just while you're handling it and moving it around the table. It will very soon fray again. So you might need to use the pinking shears in combination with either the zigzag or the overcast stitch. It kind of gives you enough time just to cut out and move your things around your sewing space. Another finishing technique you might use if you're making a skirt, for example, if you're making a circle skirt and you're not going to line it, but because it's got a big wide bottom, then when you sit down you might see inside and you don't want to see overlocking, is to Hong Kong seam. But even when you Hong Kong seam, you need to be pretty good under your sewing machine. It's probably best not to pin anything, just to try and do it from your hands to the machine so that you can just very gently keep moving the fabric. By the time you've moved it and pinned it, and then you've put the binding on, and then you've folded the binding over, everything needs to be pretty efficient or you're going to cause more fraying. So it looks really neat. But where you make a skirt, it's quite good for the side seams or the centre back seam. It also stops the seam fraying where you put in a zip. So all of these little tips here, how to put the binding on, will help you to stop the seams fraying where they will be seen. To sew brocade, you'll be wanting to allow maybe a little bit of a bigger seam allowance. So you'll remember when I cut my jacket at the beginning of the video, I made the side seam a little wider because I wanted to just have a little bit more room for if I did get some fraying. And I'm definitely on stitch length 2.5. I could even go down a little bit more, but I'm just going to try this one. That back tack is more important than with other fabrics because you want to make sure that the end doesn't fray. And you can just test the seam. You might need to tighten your stitch a little bit on the tension. I'm going to have another go. And that's much better. Just a tighter tension there has stopped those stitches peeling apart. We've already taken a look at the finishing because really by the time you've got to this stage you don't want to be trying to manipulate this under the machine because you'll start pushing and fraying this other side. If there's an area that you forgot or you know is going to be concealed, you can just quickly zigzag it and it will stop it fraying back, but it's not as good as the other methods that I showed you. You will need to do a press test if you're using Brocade. I've got a little scrap of fabric. I've got my iron on minimum, and I'm just going to start working my way up to see how the fabric behaves. And I know because my jacket has collars and I want to hem, then I just want to see what happens when I press from the right side. It's not taking the texture out of the fabric, but I'm getting enough of a press to put up a hem or to iron my collars. So I've really got it on the very, very thin end of synthetics there. Normally you'd sort of advise to use a press cloth, but I think you'll have to test with your own type of brocade. It depends how much metallic thread it's got in it, its fibre content. I think sometimes with a press cloth you tend to go a bit hotter because you think you've got to go through the press cloth as well, but that actually has pressed up really nicely. So I'm going to leave it on that setting for the rest of my project. I'm at another stage of pressing here on my collar, so I want to make sure that the under collar rolls away from the upper collar, and because the fabric's quite bouncy and when I have it on a synthetic it's not really pressing it down enough, so this time I've got my iron on a much hotter. I'm steaming away from the edge, and then I'm able to use the clapper to press the steam into that collar edge. It means the upper collar stays on the top and the under collar rolls slightly to the inside. Because of the ironing techniques that I've just shown you and how you need to use such a cool temperature, you have to use sew-in interfacing. So in these colours I couldn't press in some iron-on interfacing. You need to be able to sew them in or tack them around the edges. If it's a facing, just tack them on the edge, but you can't just really hot press interfacing onto brocade fabric. This is sew-in interfacing. It's fell a little bit out of favour now that you can get a glue in, but you're not going to be able to use a glue in interfacing with some brocades because you won't be able to put a hot enough iron to melt the glue sufficiently to stick it. So a sew-in interfacing is what is required in this instance. This is a collar. So if you're making any kind of jacket and you need to put a collar on, then you'll be looking to put some sew-in interfacing. If you're making skirts around the waistband, you'll be needing the same. So sew-in interfacing, you will need to tack in position, and you can use pad stitching. So you need really big tacking stitches because you want the collar to still be movable underneath. You can use pad stitching to really roll the collar if you want to, if you've got a lapel collar, but this one is just a flat wide collar. From the right side your stitches need to be so small that you don't see them. Once you've put all the sew-on interfacing on and it's all pad stitched in place, you can then go ahead and put the rest of your collar together. Another thing to consider with brocade fabric is any of your clipping, all those little techniques that you think you already know, you have to really turn them on their head when you're working with brocade. So round this collar, I just couldn't clip the collar because then I would start a journey of fraying around this neckline. So let's take a look at a few alternatives to clipping and turning out corners. I can see already I'm getting a little bit of fraying here. So when I come to this colour, I can't clip it. If I start clipping it, I'll really fray into the seam allowance. So now I'm going to overlock again so I can get a really small seam allowance, and then there'll be less fabric on this corner. Because the other thing I can't do with brocade is I can't cut across the corner there. If I cut across the corner, as soon as I turn it out, I'll fray that corner of the collar and it'll all pop out. So I'm going to reduce the seam allowance, and then I'm going to use a folding technique to get my collar tip. We're aiming for a nice sharp corner without clipping. So I'll show you how I did it. So I've folded the seam allowances in and held them, and then pushed it through to the right side. Use my point turning tool just to really gently move that corner, because there I've got lots of nice padding in the corner there. I'm not going to burst through to the fabric. Everything takes a little bit longer with brocade. All of the handling, pressing, and getting the finish on the fabric just takes a little bit longer. I really recommend that you think about lining your garment. So this jacket is lined with a Duchess satin. It just gives the fabric a little bit of weight. Like normally your outer fabric is heavier than your lining, and your lining will be really light. But because this fabric is really light in weight, not in hand, then I wanted something just to give the jacket a bit of heft so that it's all stayed in place. I think if I had a light fabric, it would be doing quite a bit of this. There'd be nothing holding the jacket down. So consider your linings, consider whether you're going to line. You might even choose a lining that you don't normally. So you might use a crepe, some sort of soft crepe. You might use a satin. You might use an acetate lining, a polyester one that matches the weight of your fabric. But it really does depend on which part of the garment that you're going to line. You might normally just line a bodice, but I think if you're going to be wearing a fabric with a metallic finish on the inside, then you might want to consider lining your skirt. If you've never lined trousers before and you're thinking about making brocade trousers, you'll definitely need to line them or they'll just be too uncomfortable. Another thing to consider is your closures. So this jacket was actually supposed to have 3 buttons and 3 buttonholes, but I just didn't want to disturb A, this beautiful fabric, and B, the weave of the fabric. So I've switched up my closures. So let's take a look at that. On this jacket, I have a covered button. I couldn't cover a button with the brocade. It just frayed too much. And as soon as I drew up the running threads from the back of the circle, it just all frayed off. So I've put a covered button on in a contrast colour, and then on the back I have a covered prested. It's a really couture way to finish a coat. You can get a statement button without having huge buttonholes, which would spoil the overall look of the jacket if you wore it open. So this is just a single button swing style. You can find out how to cover a prested in my tutorial here. You could also try a bound buttonhole, so you could try one in your fabric and see what it was like. Essentially a bound buttonhole is a tiny little welt, so there's lots of clipping and cutting. So again, you might find some brocades or jacquards really won't do that because they just fray too much. That was the perfect solution to my 60s jacket. One of the other things that you'll need to think about is the comfort of this fabric. If for example, anywhere it has to touch your body. So if you're making a waistband, you'll need to make a few other considerations. In the skirt that I'm making, I am not having a waistband or anything that's going to be touching my skin, only the lining. So that's something to consider when you're putting waistbands on, is to either tack this on now, the lining to the skirt, and then put a piece of bias binding tape around the top that binds all the edges together, so your finish will be your pattern skirt and then just a really neat bit of binding around the top. or in my case, I'm going to flip the lining to the inside, understitch it and not have any waistband at all. If you are making a waistband, then you need to cut 2 pieces or split your waistband into 2 pieces so that you have a different fabric on the inside waistband and your brocade on the outside waistband. It'll really mean that an item that you make will be totally wearable. If you've got something really scratchy, even just that much, it'll make your skirt, shorts, trousers, whatever you're making, impossible to wear. So do consider what's on the inside of your waistband. You can just put a piece of cotton in there. You can put a piece of lining in there. You can put a piece of satin. You can put a scrap of anything, as long as you know it's going to be comfortable against your skin. You can finish hems in various ways with brocade, but it doesn't really suit some top stitching. If you top stitch it, I think you just lose that real panache of the fabric and all of the texture. So it's best to hand stitch it down. It's not hard because brocade has got lots of threads on the reverse and plenty of thickness. You can do a very successful hand stitch. If you want an even smoother couture finish, you can bind the hem, and you can find a tutorial on that on Minerva's Learn to Sew playlist over at YouTube. If you fold your hem twice, you'll get a really bouncy thick hem, so you're best to overlock and turn once, or use the binding technique where you put a piece of bias binding along the edge, flip it up and then hand sew that down. That will enclose the raw edge. Brocade really doesn't like a top stitch, so you can top stitch. It's not that you can't, but I just don't think the fabric goes hand in hand with top stitching. So this collar isn't top stitched. I didn't put the button band line in. I haven't got a top stitch here. You'll find that you're doing a lot more hand sewing with brocade. Actually, it's quite easy because you've got a thick textury fabric, so you can always pick up a thread on the reverse, so the hand stitching isn't difficult, but it can just be a little bit time consuming. In fact, everything about working with brocade is a little bit time consuming. The cutting out, the finishing, the choosing, the making sure that you don't overhandle the fabric is all adds to the time of how you work with brocade. You can't just sort of chuck it in a bag and go back to it another time and get it out and put it away and get it out and put it away. It really is a considered project. Having said that, I have absolutely loved making this jacket. It is something I probably wouldn't have made if I wasn't making this video, but I really feel that that's a really striking, impactful item that I will keep for a very long time. If you would like to explore more fabric types, then take a look at the Minerva Fabric Guide. There's a couple of videos that support this, so you can have a more in-depth look and a chat about it. There's one with Vicky and there's one with me, and we both take you through what's inside the guide. It gives you lots of information about how fibres are made, gives you information about stretch on fabric. Really great information here about its weight versus its thickness, and that will definitely help you to understand the hand of the fabric when you see it online, and some considerations for if you're buying fabric online. The next section of the book is an index of all different fibre types. So if you understand what fibre your fabric is made out of, then you'll understand more about the characteristics of it and whether it will suit a particular project or not. The last section is the section where you'll have 70 little swatches to put into your book, like a little sticker book, and you can stick those in and refer to the 70 different cloths that we stock on our website. The QR code is really handy because if you scan the QR code, then boiled wool will be filtered to your page. So if you think, oh, I really fancy making something with this and I think I can do all of these things, or it's something I want to explore, it will filter it down so that there's only boiled wool in your search. I love the inspirational photography. It just gives you some ideas of what you can do with the fabric, and you could also go and check out that maker and see what other things they have made. So that is the Minerva fabric guide. If you've enjoyed today, that's great. If you want to leave some comments below, we really try and get our sewing community chatting down there. So if you have made something in Brocade, if you've hit a problem, we would love to hear about it. Somebody might be able to chip in and give you a response. If you have made something, we would love to see it. So do make a free account, go over to Minerva, you can make a profile, share your makes there, add photographs, descriptions, you can talk as much or as little about how you enjoyed making the project or some things that you stumbled across when you were sewing. It really does inspire our Minerva makers. It really helps people to search for fabrics online and be inspired with what other people are making at the moment. Thank you very much for watching. Do come back for more of our Fabric Masterclass. There's lots more to come. Fabrics that you might not have even explored before. If you're looking for some other content, then do stay on our Minerva YouTube channel. There you will find learn to sew videos, full sew alongs of garments, a fabric haul or fabric suggestion videos. There's lots and lots of content there to inspire you. Thank you very much. See you soon.